Hey, this is Mr. Grimm. So we're at week 8, May 5th, I believe, is today when we're doing our distance learning here. So I'm trying a new program here. I wanted to run through a few things. So we're going to talk about goals this week, alcohol use, some current events, and then a little bit of research that I did based on some of those topics with current events. So this presentation shouldn't take long. I'll kind of stumble through it here as I'm getting used to this new software. So for goals, skipped my goals already. Goals. End of the week 7 review. You guys did a really good job of going through the little form that I put out for you, and hopefully it's helping you be kind of reflective on your week. You guys were really insightful to the things that you were going through, and so it seems like it did its job at this point. And a lot of people have already set their week 8 goals and put together their tracking sheets. I like what I see so far, so it seems like you guys are on the right track with that.
A bad plan is better than no plan. It gives you something to improve. So even if your aim is vague, and even if it's off target, if you start aiming and you see you're off target, then you can shift and you can make it more precise.
You start to recognize what you don't want in that.
Yes, exactly.
Say,
exactly.
oh, I thought I wanted this, but I don't.
Exactly.
So let me re-navigate and figure out what I do
Exactly.
want. And you might have to try a bunch of things.
Well, you will have to. You can be. That's why you shouldn't get perfectionistic about it. You will absolutely be wrong, but you won't be as wrong as you would have been if you were aimless.
I would like to do a goal setting workshop later on, but I'll give you more information if I decide to do that. I won't go into it now. Okay, so in talking about alcohol, which is what we're discussing this week, so alcohol can be talked about in terms of how it affects your body and your mind. And let's go to the body section first. So alcohol is considered a depressant, which means that it slows down the rate at which the central nervous system can work. And so remember, we're talking about central nervous system. This is the neurons and the synapse in between there, and the chemicals that jump across the synapse from one axon to the dendrites of another one. And so that is where there is a slowing down process of the rate at which that speed happens. That's a depressant. So for short-term use, we talk about like the amount of alcohol that somebody would drink, which could lead to binge drinking. So depending on the amount of alcohol a person drinks, you might see them get nauseous. That could lead to vomiting. As a person increases the amount of alcohol in their system, that's going to increase the liver needing to clean out the bloodstream of the actual alcohol. And so even though you won't see a person being stressed with their liver, you would know that that is what's happening. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Plus, you can see this little silly looking video thing here. I'll have a link to that video for you as well. It gives a good explanation of what the liver has to do with alcohol. Another thing that you'll see with people who drink a lot is that they can become dehydrated, and part of that is because the liver needs a lot of water in order to process and clean out the alcohol. And so the last part is alcohol poisoning. So the person's breathing rate and their heart rate drop a lot due to alcohol, and they can drop so low that they actually stop working, and that would obviously be coma or death. So people definitely would pass out beforehand. We'll get into some of the dangers of how quickly people drink alcohol and how this breathing and heart rate drop can be at a dangerous level very quickly. So we won't watch the video now. So with long-term use, we have seen people develop heart disease. And if you think of heart disease, you can think of the heart being under so much stress and becoming inflamed and enlarged, like a red, swollen heart is how I picture heart disease. And we could get into more of the specifics on what actually is going on. But basically, the heart is not as effective as it is if it's saturated with alcohol. So then the next one is anemia, which means that the oxygen molecules are not being brought to the cells through the blood. And so people can become what's called anemic, which means that their blood is not transporting oxygen for various reasons. Let's see, the next one is liver hepatitis. And so hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. And so a liver can become swollen and not work as correctly and become inflamed if there's alcohol use. Cirrhosis could come later on, and cirrhosis is when scar tissue develops on the liver, or the cells of the liver die and they're replaced by scar tissue. And if you've ever gotten a scar like on your arm or your hand or whatever, you know that the scar is just fibrous tissue that's holding things together, but it doesn't actually work the same way that the original cells did. And so with cirrhosis of the liver, that's basically meaning that the liver is slowly losing part of its function and it's turning into scar tissue. The next part is the intestines, and that's vitamin and mineral absorption. So with the intestines, the small intestine is where most of the vitamins and minerals are absorbed, and that does not take place when people's bodies are saturated with alcohol, meaning there's a lot of alcohol in their bloodstream over a long period of time. And so what that means is that a person who's been drinking a lot for a long period of time, they do not absorb the minerals even if they're eating food. So vitamins and minerals don't go into their bodies, I should say, as efficiently. And I'd have to do more research to find out the exact extent of that, which I will. Let's see, and then personality changes and dementia. So dementia, I'm looking on the website here, it's a syndrome where there is deterioration in memory, thinking, behavior, and the ability to perform everyday activities. I do not have personal experience with anybody with dementia, but I've known people who have lived with others with dementia, and it is, I've heard, very tough to watch people go through. And then on a smaller scale, you can see personality changes in a person who's drinking a lot of alcohol for a long period of time. So if we go back to alcohol affecting the mind, that's pretty much the reason that people do it. If we want to sum that up from the way that I see it, is that it changes how people feel. They use it to relax, they use it to have fun, they use it just for those changes in their feeling. And it obviously, there are people who drink and it does not lead to problems, and then there are people who drink and it leads to problems. So again, this is just kind of exploring the opening parts of the topic here. It does affect people's decision making as well. People just do not make the same types of decisions if they're using alcohol versus when they're not using alcohol. And you can see, if we go back to the decision-making model that we've used a lot in this class, weighing out as many pros and cons as you can see is a really good process to go through to try to make the best decision. And so typically what happens, especially with teens, is that teens are already fairly impulsive in a stereotypical type sense. Obviously, not every teen is only impulsive. But if you're altering the way that the brain operates in an already fairly impulsive and generally inexperienced mind, then decision-making might be affected there. Now, obviously, the degree to which a person changes the way they feel and how poorly their decision-making gets affected is going to be due to blood alcohol concentration. So we have a graphic here of blood alcohol content, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see the mouse that I'm running over the top of it, but we'll give it a try now. The red section is the legal limit for driving. So if a person is driving and they get pulled over and they blow into a breathalyzer and it's anywhere in this red area, it's depending on where their weight is up here. So a person who weighs 160 pounds, if they blow a 0.08, what would that be? A female. If she's had 2 drinks, a female with 2 drinks, typically at 160 pounds, would, they call it below a 0.08, meaning that her blood alcohol content is at 80%. And so we can kind of go into different scenarios through this blood alcohol content chart. Tomorrow or the next day, I will go into what's kind of down at the bottom in the white part. 1 drink equals 1.5 ounces, 80 proof liquor, 12 ounces of 5% beer, or 5 ounces of 12% wine. And so again, it says fewer than 5 persons out of 100 will exceed these values. That means that this chart isn't exactly perfect and can't predict everything. These are the general guidelines. But I will also go into more about the liquor, beer, and wine breakdown that is there. Okay, so that will be in the future. So alcohol affects the people's personal goals because of decision making, and through a lot of the information that you guys wrote, it turns out that a lot of people drink because they feel pressure to do so. So we'll discuss that a little bit more in the future too. Okay, moving on. Current events. Up in Paso, there was a gathering of people on Friday, and Dr. Warren Frankel was encouraging people to start questioning whether or not we should really be locked down. And he did mention Dr. Fauci. And so I wanted to just talk about Dr. Fauci for a moment. I went and watched this Dr. Fauci interview, and in the interview, he did mention that there is a company in the pharmacology industry. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. He mentioned that he is working with his pharma colleagues, meaning that the government and private business are working together to develop a vaccine. And so it started me thinking on the vaccine process that we had kind of discussed a little bit back a couple of weeks ago. And so the National Institute for Health and big pharma companies kind of put me on this little research journey, if you will. And I started looking into the vaccine approval process. I'm going to put together the research that I found on this. But basically what I found out for the current COVID-19 vaccine progress is that there was a company that had developed an antiviral drug years ago, and they had already gone through some of the different phases for the vaccine approval process. For just to sum this up, they had gone through steps 1 and 2. So that was years ago, and when they started number 3, they found that it wasn't working for what they were testing for. So they put all of the drug basically on the shelf. They just kept it. So then the current situation rolls around. They looked back at these drugs and they said, oh, let's step this process back up and see if that drug works for this COVID-19 problem that we're having here. And it turns out that they were given the pass. They didn't have to go back through all of the steps in the FDA. So you may hear of an EAU or an extension. Is it EAU? I'll have to look at my notes again, which I should right now, but I don't have them in front of me. Anyway, they were granted the extension, so they're kind of jumping through the process. And so if you go on the news right now and look up Gilead or Remdesivir, I think that's what it's called, Remdesivir is the name of the drug, you may be able to see that there's some news out right now about how they're moving forward with that process. And so I thought that was interesting. Okay, last thing, oxidative stress. So we had also looked into medcram.com's videos, and I've been keeping up on the information that they're putting out. And oxidative stress has to do with, it's a chemical type reaction that gets rid of things that are like acidic or damaging within the body. And so it turns out that COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 actually increases oxidative stress. So I guess that's the best way to put it. And I'll link to the MedCram videos too. But what this is doing is it's causing problems with arteries. So arteries and veins, and it has to do with the cells that make up the blood vessels, at least at the point that they're finding out right now. And so it's kind of an interesting, through the MedCram videos, you can see the actual way that this vaccine that they're trying to develop works, and you can also get a really good explanation of what are some of the main risk factors for having a really bad case of COVID-19. And a lot of it is due to this thing called oxidative stress. And so one of the things that it leads to is, it brings us to the question, what causes oxidative stress? Cardiovascular disease. So that means poor diet, not exercising, not sleeping, and being under a lot of stress. So I hope you guys are healthy, and I hope that you're going to follow along with me as I kind of talk about this thing about oxidative stress and how the things that are going on in the news right now relate directly to the things that we're learning about here. And I can make it as relevant as possible. I just need your feedback. So what I'd like from you is, don't give me feedback on this video because I know I'm all over the place and not smooth with my info, but what specific research type questions do you have that I could look up and address? So that's it. What questions do you have about any of the parts of my presentation that I gave here, talking about goals, alcohol, some of the current events, and any research that's going on? Please let me know, and I will talk at you very soon.